Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. As Shrujita mentioned, over the last 6 months, our team at Conex has been working on a GCoE Innovation Benchmark report. And in the next 30 minutes, I'll be sharing insights that we've gathered from the benchmarking exercise, specifically around internal innovation programs. And I hope that what we share today is of value to all of you. I'd like to, if any of you would like to access the benchmark report, it will be available on the GAP portal. If you're not a GAP member, you can still get the abridged version of the benchmark report. And if you'd like to get your copy, please write to Prashant or info@zinnov.com for your copy after this webinar. So let's get started. In 2021, we saw a significant increase in talent competition and hence a rise in the talent cost. And if this trend is going to continue, the cost advantage that GCoEs had and the primary reason that was driving MNCs to invest in India might not continue to be that big of an advantage in the future. However, there is evidence that innovation can be the new USP for a lot of India centers. India has a robust ecosystem for innovation with our high quality talent, the startups, and the emerging market access. And in our study, we found that about 16% of the GCoEs already have very strong innovation narratives from India. For example, we know that Bosch and Honeywell are some centers that are driving new growth region mandates for their organization. We know GE Healthcare is driving a lot of new product innovation from India. The rest of the ecosystem too is actively investing in innovation, but our finding was that in spite of investing almost the same kind of budgets, not all programs are unlocking the same kind of value for their parent organization. And this is mainly because of a difference in the approach to running innovation programs. In today's session, we will mainly focus on internal innovation programs. So our benchmark report really focused on all three levers, including startup and academic programs. But for this particular session, we'll want to go deep into internal innovation itself. So we'll be covering what is it that we tend to miss out in terms of our approaches and what are some of the challenges that if we overcome or some of the changes that we make, our programs can deliver more value. So to do this in a very structured way, we came up with an innovation maturity framework. So this is a 4-stage innovation maturity framework. As you can see, on the x-axis, you'll see the innovation maturity. On the y-axis, you see the age of the GCoE. And as programs mature or as GCoEs go from one stage to another, the value generated from these programs increases. Now, to take you through the 4 stages, the first stage is what we call innovation as a concept. This is where GCoEs want to pursue innovation, but the efforts may be slightly ad hoc. Next is innovation as an activity. So this is where there is more commitment on the innovation programs, and there are multiple activities or initiatives going on, but we don't really see a necessary pipeline of experiments that is being nurtured. The next stage is innovation as the process. This is where programs start to become more coherent, and there is continuously and GCoEs are continuously nurturing the innovation pipeline. And in the stage 4 is where the processes become so strong that they're almost second in nature to the GCoE. And this is where the pace of experimentation really increases. The center is able to take on much bigger bets, and hence there's a strong portfolio of innovation programs for the center. To map where GCoEs lie across the 4 stages of maturity, we looked at these 4 pillars. The first pillar is the strategic intent. So here is where we look for the alignment of the local innovation charter with the global priorities, and also look at the kind of resources and the commitment that the local charter is able to get from key business leaders. Then next, we look at innovation processes. So innovation processes, in essence, are the innovation programs that you run on ground and the nuances of how you go about running them. The next is enablers. So enablers are essentially the kind of synergies that you have with different functions. In case of internal innovation, it becomes extremely important to focus on synergies with the HR and L&D teams, because only when you synergize with them are you able to really scale and sustain employee-led innovation programs. And finally, we have the innovation metrics. This is where we look at a bunch of leading and lagging indicators to ensure that the programs that we are running on ground are really effective and getting the results that we are looking for. In this exercise, we worked with across 45 GCoEs across India, and our framework indicated that a majority of the GCoEs are in innovation as an activity stage, followed by a cluster at innovation as a concept stage. Now, let us try and understand why this is happening. So our understanding was this is because of 5 key challenges. And we believe that if GCoEs find a way to overcome these challenges, we will be able to make a significant shift in the kind of outcomes that we deliver through our internal innovation programs. So the first challenge is really the structural barriers. As we studied multiple innovation charters, we noticed that GCoEs might be missing out on key KPIs or business priorities of global leaders, and are and this is why there might be slightly lesser interest or support to nurture some of the programs in the local innovation charter. The second challenge is really the lack of homogeneous processes. So often initiatives like hackathons or innovation labs are launched by different leaders at different points in time. While this is okay, what tends to happen is that these programs don't feed into each other, or they don't link into each other, and that's the root cause of not having a very holistic innovation pipeline. The third challenge is apprehensive investments. A typical example that we saw across GCoEs is that we're missing out on essential investments like investing in an exclusive innovation team. So while we saw similar budgets, some GCoEs have invested in innovation programs but not backed it up with an innovation team. And unfortunately, that's a trade-off that risks the success of this very program. The fourth challenge that we saw is not enough focus on delivering value for the business. So many GCoEs are innovating in incremental or business as usual areas. Now, this is very, very essential, but we cannot miss out on the importance of high impact innovation. The more value we promise to deliver to the overall organization, the more interesting or the more important the GCoE becomes in the overall global innovation journey. And lastly, but very critically, is the transferability of skill sets. So across GCoEs, we saw that there's some programs or some teams that are successful. However, the skill set and the mindset of these teams is not necessarily transferred to the rest of the workforce. Now, what happens is the rest of the workforce also participates, but they're not able to necessarily succeed with their ideas and projects. And this is where the gap comes in. So to go slightly deeper into these areas, we'll move on to the next section where I'll be sharing some of the case studies in a little more detail. So to start off, the first pillar that we will be discussing is the strategic intent. So strategic intent, we look at the innovation charter if the themes that the center is focusing on are aligned to the short-term and long-term business priorities, the scale, if it is incremental, transformative, breakthrough innovation, and if enough resources and time commitment is really coming in from the right levels of leadership. So what we noticed here was that things like process transformation, new product innovation, or entry into new markets is what's really interesting to global business leaders. So if GCoEs are only focusing on incremental innovation, which is what we see happening at the concept and activity stages, not on any of these areas, they tend to not get that kind of support or visibility or commitment from the leaders. We can see here in this example that a very young GCoE is actually at innovation as a process stage, and that's purely because of very strong focus on business outcomes. And if you look at this example, both of the GCoEs are actually talking about culture of innovation and having employees focus on innovation, but when we look at the first example, the GCoE has overemphasized engagement, which is important, but itself has become an end goal in their innovation charter. So this kind of a charter definitely impacts the leadership participation as well. So if you look at this graph, you'll notice that a significant number of leaders are supporting innovation programs. However, if you look at the time that they're giving and the accountability, that significantly changes, or that's the main difference across some of the less mature and more mature GCoEs. The next pillar that we'd like to discuss is innovation as a process. Now, is the process pillar. In the process pillar, we look at the collective capabilities of the GCoE to deliver on a particular innovation mandate. So here we first start off and look at the team and the KRAs. What are the kind of programs that are being leveraged in the organization? If you're speaking about transformative or breakthrough innovation, which is away from the product roadmap, do we really see programs or capabilities in place to nurture these ideas and projects? And how is it that customer context is really being utilized in the entire innovation process? So in terms of process, that we what we noticed is that there are few GCoEs who have innovation teams, and then the main focus of these teams is really on idea sourcing. What this does is it impacts the innovation pipeline, and and even if GCoEs go ahead and invest in building customer context mechanisms because they don't really have a pipeline or they're not operating from that approach, they're not using the customer context mechanisms enough. So we'll try to explain this a little bit more to the next slides. So if we look at the GCoEs in the first two buckets, we see that most of them, like I said, do not have an innovation team. And the activities that these teams are doing, mostly part-time responsibles, are mainly around sourcing ideas, probably running a hackathon or running challenges. What happens is that team KRAs like nurturing partnerships with business or managing projects in the experiment phase are completely missed out on. And these are very, very essential to build the innovation pipeline. So if you look at the examples on this slide, the first team here is having innovation as an additional responsibility. And you'll see most of the work here really is revolving around running a challenge or applying for a particular award externally. However, in the next example, you'll see that there is an exclusive innovation team. And the workload looks very, very holistic. So this includes sourcing, it includes running voice of customer exercise, it includes doing pitches to business units, and really managing that innovation pipeline and following up on it. The next thing that we looked at is programs, and when we try to look at the programs across the innovation journey, we saw most of the programs being similar to the illustrative example here, which is around sourcing. So if there is an idea which is slightly higher impact and needs to be nurtured from outside, needs to be nurtured outside of business or outside the product roadmap, we didn't really see too many programs to allow that kind of experimentation to happen. So let's again look at an example here. So we have two GCoEs that we're going to look at. So if you look at the GCoE innovation as an activity stage, you'll see an overemphasis on ideation. And as a result, what's happening is their pipeline has 2,500 ideas. They've had one idea patented, but not really any of these ideas have been deployed. Whereas if you look at another example of a GCoE in innovation as a process, we see that they have programs, but they're well distributed across the innovation journeys. You see that there's an internal incubator as well. And we see the pipeline looks much healthier. So they're much lesser ideas, but it's much healthier because, they have 450 ideas, they're running 100 experiments. And out of that, they've already been able to have 5 launches. Yes. Now, when we look at the customer context mechanism, we see that GCoEs are investing in customer context mechanisms. This is a conversation that we've been having outside of innovation as well. And what's happening in the innovation context is that we're not necessarily utilizing them throughout the innovation journey. So what we mean by this is take a scenario where a project is to be prioritized or an idea is to be selected. What happens more often than not is that the decision of which idea, which project to pick is usually with a particular leader. And the assumption that we are making if we take that approach is that this particular leader has all the market context that is needed to make this decision. Now, we know that that's not the case because all leaders don't have all the information needed as well. So a good example here would be to look at this particular GCoE in innovation as a process stage. They use voice of customer exercises to support their entire ideation process. So only when the teams have enough evidence do they go and pitch the idea. And when they pitch the idea, there is enough evidence for the decision maker also to make a definitive decision and say that, yes, we'll go and pursue this idea because there is enough proof of, the customer need around this. The next pillar that we're going to talk about is enablers. So these, like we discussed, is focusing on the synergies with the functional teams. In case of internal innovation, role of HR and L&D becomes extremely important because if you can incentivize innovation or if you can skill employees with critical skills needed to actually succeed in the innovation process, this is only when your innovation programs can actually sustain and scale. So we saw that GCoEs with higher innovation maturity are actually skilling their employees to take ideas forward right from insight to experimentation to market and scale. And a lot of other GCoEs, especially in the earlier stages of maturity, are focused on L&D, but there could be overemphasis on technology and not really the entire innovation journey. So let's look at this again in a little more detail. We saw that just 9% of the programs, the L&D programs that we were looking at were actually supporting teams across the innovation journey. And if I was to give an example and add a little more color to this, you'll see that in the first example, the employees are basically getting support to brainstorm better. In the second example, we're seeing that, yes, they're brainstorming better, they're using design thinking, they're also getting some hand holding in terms of building out their concepts and ideas. However, if you look at the next two stages, we'll see that they are making stronger business cases. They are getting support to actually experiment much faster on ground as well. The final pillar that we want to talk about today is the metrics pillar. So metrics are divided into two, which is leading and lagging indicators. Many of you might be familiar with this. So the first kind of metric that we could discuss is the lagging indicator. So this is the kind of business impact that you want to have, the kind of savings or revenue that you want to unlock for the parent organization. And then the second is a bunch of leading indicators. So to make sure that we are able to check or monitor that we are on the right path to actually creating that XX billion dollar savings for the global organization. Now, when we studied the metrics, we noticed that majority of the GCoEs are focusing on input metrics like sourcing, running sourcing initiatives or the kind of participation that they're able to get. Not many are focusing on effectively measuring the innovation pipeline, which is a very, very important leading indicator if we are to really ensure we create business impact. So if we look at this graph, we've divided it into leading and lagging indicators. So lagging is essentially the value in terms of the innovation portfolio. So things like the IRR. Then we have the final business impact, which is the dollar value that we are able to unlock. However, this comes after certain time, and what we need to focus on month on month, week on week is really the leading indicators. So the input metrics, right? So if we are able to run the sourcing activities, and if we have gotten enough ideas, how are those ideas really translating into the innovation pipeline? What we noticed was that this critical middle part is missing in the way we are monitoring ourselves accountable for innovation. And that makes it slightly risky to say that, am I actually going to create a business impact or not? And does not allow us to take proactive action and corrective steps to ensure we reach that business impact. So if you look at this example here, you will notice that this is a GCoE at innovation as an activity stage. What they're measuring is the ideas that they're generating from innovation workshops, and they're measuring ideas implemented. While these are good, the firm has really missed out on something that helps them understand the pipeline. So maybe something like an approval rate that could be a better quality indicator that the GCoE could work towards. when we look at examples across GCoEs, we saw that process and culture stage is where there is a good balance of leading and lagging indicators. And this is really allowing GCoEs to experiment a lot more freely with a lot more freedom and then really make that business impact. So those are some of the findings, but as you think about your way forward and reflect on the current state and what's happening in your GCoE, we'd recommend that you first push yourself to demonstrate certain wins and deploy certain ideas into business. Once you know you're able to do that, the next step would really be to take bolder bets. If you've deployed a smaller feature or a slightly lower impact idea, the next thing would be to look at more savings impact or more revenue impact as a bold bet and try to hit that. Once you have had certain success here, you have 2 or 3 projects that have been able to create this kind of impact, what the focus should be on is to repeat and scale this. How can we continue to take these bolder bets for the parent organization? And that's how we start to become very important in the innovation journey of the global organization. And very, very fundamental to this is having a strong innovation pipeline. And we want to make sure that you do not miss out on any of these key steps that are needed to ensure a healthy innovation pipeline. So I'll just call those out. The first one we think is a strong L&D program, because this really impacts the quality and the relevance of ideas that you are receiving. The second is customer context mechanisms. As we discussed, it helps you prioritize use cases, make decisions, and understand what are the ideas that you really want to be focusing on. Next is a coherent set of innovation programs that really help you build a pipeline. The next thing is definitely an innovation management office with strong and specialized skills that can help you nurture that pipeline. And finally, a set of metrics that focus on delivering business value. With that, my 30 minutes are up. And thank you so much for hearing this, and I hope this was helpful. The complete benchmark report is a lot more detailed, and it would be available on the GAP platform. An abridged version would be available to everyone, and if you'd like to get the abridged version, please write into Prashant or info@zinnov.com after this webinar to get your copy. I will now hand it back to Shrujita.